All right, I'm very pleased to have Andy Kahan meeting with me today. He is the Director of Victim Services and Advocacy for the Houston Crime Stoppers. I can't think of a more important topic to discuss and review, and I'm looking forward to that conversation with Andy. The mission of Crime Stoppers, let me just state that because I think it's so important. The mission of Crime Stoppers of Houston Victim Services and Advocacy Program is to promote safety, healing, justice, and rights for the crime victims and survivors. We don't talk nearly enough about the victims of crime. So I'm glad to have Andy Kahan here with me today. Andy, why don't you talk a bit about what Crime Stoppers does?
Sure. Thanks for having me here, Tom. I mean, you hit it right on the head. My mantra has always been, and I've actually let at least one commissioner actually use my mantra. So if you hear him, tell him he got me to thank for that. But that crime victims are the only unwilling participants in the criminal justice system. Everyone else chose their role. Law enforcement, defenders, attorneys, judges, but I've never met anyone in my 30 plus years who said, pick me, I want to be a victim of a crime. So it's the least you can do in government and in nonprofits like Crime Stoppers is to have somebody looking out for the victims' rights, their well-being, their due process, their counseling, their rehabilitation. And no, quite frankly, there's way too much emphasis right now, and particularly now, on offenders' rights and treatment. And that's why Crime Stoppers, it's amazing because we're the only Crime Stoppers in the country that has a victim advocacy, victim services department. And I've been there now a little over 2 years. Prior to that, I was a victim advocate with the City of Houston in the mayor's office for 18 years and also with the Houston Police Department. So I bring about 30 years of experience as a victim advocate to the table.
Well, thank you for what you do, Andy. It's important. Explain the relationship between Crime Stoppers and the Harris County Commissioners Court. What is the expectation there in terms of Crime Stoppers?
Well, we actually work very closely with commissioners, as we do with representatives of the Houston City Council and the mayor and a county judge. We work with them on several cases that might happen in their precinct that they want out there. They refer us to victims as well that might call in for assistance, and we really try to keep them abreast on the issues that we're currently seeing right now, particularly in crime trends. And one of the most troubling issues that we're looking at right now is, quote, so-called bond reform. And make no mistake about it, Crime Stoppers did support misdemeanor bond reform, which I think everybody did. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But what we don't support, and I think most rational and people with, half a brain on them don't support, is what we're seeing right now in the felony district courts. And the felony district courts are not under a court order, unlike the misdemeanor court judges, to release offenders. But the felony district courts, from what we're seeing, have basically taken it upon themselves and have just decided we're going to mass release violent offenders. You have over 4,000 violent offenders right now that are currently on bond, on some form of bond in Harris County.
You wrote an article, Andy, called The Ramifications of Criminal Justice and Bond Reform, which you do acknowledge that there are certain elements of that there did need reform. But in that you stated time and again, we're seeing some defendants released on multiple bonds, continually being arrested for additional felony crimes, and yet we just to get out of jail on new bonds is just creating such a fear in the neighborhood. It's creating problems when we don't have to. Could you speak?
Well, there a lot of, I took it upon myself, Tom. I started noticing a trend when I started doing research on defendants who were being charged with murder in Harris County, and I started to pick up that a good percentage of these had been released not just on one felony bond, but on multiple felony bonds for different offenses, and some of them were also released on PR bonds. So I actually started a list, and right now, sadly, there are 60 people, 60, I mean, think about that, who have been killed, and that's just in the last 2 years. Since 2018 that I've put together, who have been killed by defendants who have been released umpteen amount of times on multiple felony bonds and PR bonds. And to me, that was extremely troubling, that no one knew this was going on, And so it raised several questions that I brought up in my op-ed that the Houston Chronicle was supposed to print several times, but then they backed off. But that's another story on another day right there. But the issues that we don't have, and this is where I think Commissioners Court really becomes vitally important in regards to public safety, is we do not know how many defendants are out on multiple bonds. We don't know what types of offenses they're on. We don't know how many defendants on felony bonds have gone missing, have had bond forfeiture, who have warrants out for their arrest. We don't know how many people who have become victims of violent crime as a result of defendants on multiple felony bonds. We need to have that information, and we don't have it. And in this day and age of full transparency, it's beyond my comprehension as to why we don't have this data.
So that's the Chronicle's not printing articles about it, like maybe they should. And there's community partners out there. Every neighborhood that I've gone into, they consider it important. What can some community partners do with you to try to get the word out?
Well, we actually sent out a press release last week. We're working in a bipartisan effort with Senator Paul Betancourt and Senator John Whitmire to create a reasonable bond reform. And in the old days, and a lot of people might remember, it used to be there was an adage, one bond per customer. If you were released on bond and then you were charged with another crime, guess what? You weren't getting back out again. And we are not seeing that. I mean, some of these cases that I'm looking at are absolutely mind-blowing. We have, of the 60 people that have been killed, 20 defendants are now charged with capital murder. 6 are domestic violence related. We had one grandmother, oh God, this was absolutely horrific, Rosalie Cook, 80 years old, coming out of Walgreens in the Meyerland area, and a guy runs up to her, stabs her, and kills her. He'd been arrested over 60 times. He was given a PR bond and sent to live in that's another story, on an assisted living facility. And then after 2 days, he took off, became a fugitive. Nobody knew it. And now you have an 80-year-old Rosalie Cook. And there was no public outrage, no marches, no demonstrations, no justice for Rosalie Cook. And from where I sit, that's frustrating, because her life and so many other lives certainly do matter.
And that particular story, I know I've talked to many, many people. They know that story. It bothers them greatly that there doesn't seem to be anything done about it. And so there is that sense of, well, that's not right. We can do better. What are your thoughts on the constable program? You know, we've got a constable program in Harris County, and I think a lot of people would wake up and have a strong opinion on the constable program. What's your thoughts on the constable program?
We work very closely with constables on a lot of different issues, particularly in Alan Rosen on human trafficking, Mark Herman, who does a great job in putting out everybody that he arrests, and therefore we can check their track record as well. So I think they do a tremendous job and a tremendous service, and I think we actually need to do more with them as far as the issue, particularly on repeat offenders and so forth. But I think, you know, bond reform, like I said, has to be nonpartisan. I think we all need to be on the same page, and those who do support bond reform, I would think that they would want to have the information, particularly to the questions that we pose. And as a victim advocate, I remember a couple months ago, there was an 11-year-old boy that was shot and killed, and I'm sitting there trying to talk to this family, and I'm trying to explain to them, and I'm saying, I'm sorry that this happened to your case, but yes, this was a tragedy, but it was utterly preventable because the guy had been released several times. I mean, you're sending out signals when you're out on bond and you commit yet another crime. You're not doing that person any favor when you continue to punt them back into the community. So that's one strong issue that we're looking at right now. Another issue that we brought up, believe it or not, you have there was 196 convicted felons who have gone missing from a halfway house here. And
wow.
no one knows, and there's no PR, there's no media alert. Unlike, you know, for example, and I point out the analogy, if I break out of prison, you're going to get a media alert. The public's going to be told, be on the lookout, such and such. But if I break out of a halfway house, nobody knows anything. So a lot of it's really just changing the mindset on how we approach these things. And that's what makes Crime Stoppers so unique, is our ability to get these issues out, have talks with the public. Almost every day, if you go to our website, we're doing some sort of live session with members of the public, members of law enforcement, talking about these issues. And a lot of ways that we seek to improve these issues is through legislative remedies. My adage is always, anybody can yell and scream about injustice of the world. I would much prefer to find a solution and a remedy.
Well, in a category of solutions, and we're in what is termed a COVID season. And when we have our COVID season, we know that the homicides are up 41%. We know that violent crimes are up 36%. People understand those numbers. Can you speak to what we can do coming out of the COVID and dealing with the crime, dealing with the issues that we've got? It seems to have been compounded with COVID during this season.
It's been extremely frustrating, particularly for victims of violent crime. Crime Stoppers, we used to routinely do press conferences, putting out rewards and getting the word out to people on unsolved cases. We haven't done a press conference since COVID. I think I've done 2 or 3 stories since early March on cases that we've put out on Crime Stoppers. So kind of the victims have just kind of been forgotten and dropped off the planet. We're not doing anything.
Why is that, Andy? Why would such an important element, when we talk about everything you can imagine during this season, in this, I can't think of anything more important. There's nothing that impacts some neighborhoods more than crime, and in the very neighborhoods that we're supposed to be protecting, maybe the poorer neighborhoods, they're the most impacted. I just don't understand why that's not.
I agree with your perspective on this. It's been very frustrating for us because we can't get these cases out there that we used to routinely get out there and covered. And you can imagine how frustrating it is for a victim's family, because they have more of a vested interest in getting these cases solved than anything. One of the things that we do at Crime Stoppers, we try to take negatives, turn them into positives. We can't go back and change what happened to you or your family, but we try to make things better for others to come along, and that way you've achieved a lasting legacy. And that's kind of what my adage is, and that's kind of what Crime Stoppers is about, working with the community. I think we need to do a better job of doing that.
What can we do with the communities to better organize, better support, better focus on the victims, focus on providing possible solutions? What do you see are some things we can do?
You have if you are elected as commissioner, you have a powerful bully pulpit right there in front of you. And what I need to see, what victims need to see, certainly, is actual fruitful discussion on real life issues. Like I said, I get what's going on with offenders. I get all that stuff, but victims have just seemed to be forgotten about, and they're being treated with disinstitutionalized disinterest. For every offender, there is a victim. And that's important. I don't care whether it's a burglary. When you think how we classify, let's say, auto theft, or burglary is actually classified as a nonviolent offense. But if I break into your home, trust me, it's a violent offense waiting to happen. You're just lucky you weren't home at the time. But we classify offenses like that, and we kind of downplay them. If I steal somebody's car, you're taking someone's livelihood away, but we don't treat it like, oh, it's property crime. Property offenders, from my perspective, wreak more havoc on a community, quite frankly, than a lot of violent, because these are your career habitual criminals. Most people, luckily and thankfully, don't go around killing people. But property offenders, they do go around burglarizing businesses, burglarizing cars, and stealing.
What would be a good word or two to our constituents out there on what they can do to be vigilant, what they can do to anticipate things, avoid things? What are some good practical things they can do?
As far as not being a victim of crime,
yes.
Again, you got to be aware of your surroundings and your situations. One thing that we do at Crime Stoppers is we do post tips for people on how not to be a victim of a crime. We have an incredible institution for safe school safety that we do. We do a whole thing on human trafficking. But again, you have to understand, and I don't mean to be a downer on this, but I'm also a realist. Like it or not, there's evil people in this world. And the quicker you grasp that concept, You know, I used to tell people, be careful of what you put on your cars. I said, I know this might sound pretty mundane, but you see a lot of cars driving around. My son, my daughter's an honor student. Guess what? You're a walking advertisement for someone that might want to think. If you put down there, guess what? And I actually had somebody that was a robber and a burglar tell me this. He used to case malls and look for cars with these things because A, that told him a clue what neighborhood you lived in. B, it told me that you do have kids, which means you have electronics. And C, all I got to do is look around there and see if you're home during the day. So be careful of what you advertise to people. Be careful what you put on social media. People are looking at these things. So just, you know, you've got to, for everything that you might think is innocuous or mundane, there are other people looking at it as an opportunity to take advantage of you.
Andy Kahan, we appreciate you. I am so glad that there's someone waking up every day advocating for victims so that we can reduce the number of victims of crime in Harris County. I look forward to working with you going forward and being a strong supporter of Crime Stoppers, and look forward to seeing and working with you again.
Thanks, Tom. We appreciate you, and good luck on your election.
Thank you.
You bet.